Okay, so we've reached the render settings stage, and I'm going to show you how to optimize your ROPs to get a faster render. So I've jumped into the ROPnet. We'll drop down a fresh ROP, so a Redshift custom ROP. Let's select the camera, and we'll do half the resolution to make this faster. Turn off render to end play, we don't need that. We're going to render this image to images, Redshift. I've just put another folder in here called renders. You can put it wherever you want as long as you remember where it is. And we'll call this something generic like all_v1.exr. We'll go to the Redshift tab and we'll leave all the settings as is for now. Let's open up the render view. And we'll see what the current render looks like. Wait for him to start up. Also going to make sure that we got the render cam selected for this. Just checking that we got all the right objects on. Yeah, it's looking okay. Okay, let's go back into the ROPnet. We'll name this to all. And what we want to do now is we want to figure out what is causing all of this noise. And the best way to do this is to add AOVs. So let's pause it. We'll go over to the output tab. And under the AOV section, we're going to add 5 AOVs. The first one will be diffuse slicing. Second one, specular lighting. Third one, reflections. Fourth one, refractions. And fifth one will be global illumination. So using all 5 of these passes, we can more or less reduce all of the noise. And we're going to rely heavily on using local samples, which is the most efficient way of reducing noise. What you don't want to do is go to your sampling options and set your unified sampling really high, because you're relying on the unified sampling to clean up all your noise, and that's very inefficient. So we want to use the local samples. So for example, you might not have much noise in the reflection, so therefore it makes sense to lower the reflection samples. You might have more noise in your diffuse AOV, so then you'd increase the light samples. So let's do that. So we'll take a snapshot. We're going to hit re-render. Wait for that to start. Turn on bucket rendering. And we have our 5 AOVs here. So we've got our GI, and we don't have GI turned on right now, so there's no noise coming from there. We've got our refraction, reflection, specular, and diffuse. We're going to be using global illumination in this render. So you can test out brute force, but it produces a hell of a lot of noise. So in the majority of cases, I'll use irradiance caching, as it's quicker and it also produces less noise. So that's something to take into consideration. So we'll choose irradiance cache and irradiance point cloud here. We'll turn the number of GI bounces down to 2. I find 2 is sort of like the optimal amount for me. I find if you go past this value, it's hard to tell the difference and each time you increase this or double it, you're adding a little bit of time to the final render. We can put the brute force GI rays up, but I think we'll leave them at 16 for now. This would have to be set significantly higher to around 1024 if you were using brute force method. But in nature, the irradiance caching method is naturally sort of less noisy as it sort of averages the pixels out. We can leave this to rebuild and don't save right now, but we will save out an irradiance cache map or a radiance point cloud map and an irradiance caching map to speed up our render times. Under the optimizations tab, we can leave the reflection at 4. This could possibly go to 6, but we'll leave it at 4 for now. Refraction, I'd usually set at 8, and this depends on if you have refractive materials in your scene. So for example, glass. We also have the tablecloth, which shows up in the refraction AOV, so that could get noisy. So and also this max trace step doesn't control the noise. It sort of controls how far the ray can go through a surface. So for example, with the refraction max trace depth, if I had 4 glasses lined up in a row next to each other, like one in front of the other, and 4 of them, then we would need, so each glass has 4 sides, so the outside, the inside of the surface, the inside of the surface, and the outside. So we'd need, in that case, 4 for the refraction just to go through 1 glass. Then to go through 2 glasses, we need 8. To go through 3 glasses, we would need 12. And to go through 4 glasses, we'd need 16. So let's drop that back down to, I think, 8. I usually set that 8 minimum. And let's set the transparency down to 2. So these are usually nice figures to start off with, and usually I end up settling with these, so try them out. Make sure that we've got all of these ticked. And we'll hit render. Okay, so that's given us a reasonably clean render already. We've still got noise, but we can reduce that now. So the first pass we want to do is GI, and that's actually looking pretty clean. If you were using brute force and you had 16 samples, this would be super noisy, like incredibly noisy. So irradiance caching is really good when it comes to GI. Let's go to the refraction tab. The refraction tab's looking quite clean. So this is the opacity showing up in the refraction there. So we can go to, this is where we go and change our local samples now. So we'll do refraction first. Let's save that. And we'll put the minimum, so 8, so something around 8. I wouldn't usually go any lower than this for local samples, but 8 is fine. The next one is reflection. So the reflection is noisy, so we're going to need more than 8 for this. So you can see here. So we'll turn on the reflection override and we'll put in something like 64. Let's see what that does. Re-render. So let's compare. So you can see we've reduced the noise, but it's still not gone. So let's try going up. We could double this to 128. Try that. Take a snapshot. And this is more or less sort of how I work my way through the AOVs. Just trying to clean the noise up locally, which is a nice efficient method. And it's a very bad workflow to not use this if you're trying to figure out where the noise is coming from. Split the AOVs out so you can see it, and this will result in a much faster render time. If you try to, there you go, that's a lot cleaner. So if you try to crank up the unified sampling here, you're relying on the unified sampling to clean up the noise, and that's not right. The unified sampling should be used to sort of clean up the edges of the objects, like things like lines and whatnot. And it shouldn't be used to clean up things like diffuse noise and reflection noise and the lights. That's what you want to use the local samples for. Okay, so that is looking cleaner. That looks a lot better already. So let's go back to settings, sampling override. So 128 looks good, but let's go up to 256. I want to see how far we can push this, as I still think there is a little bit of noise in the reflection AOV there. And just a tip, the local samples, generally speaking, should be higher than the unified samples. Just as a general rule of thumb. That way we don't put too much pressure on the unified sampling to clean all the noise up in the scene. We just use the unified sampling to do its intended job. So in probably every scenario, I would be using sampling overrides. And you can see here the reflection samples are higher than our min and max samples. Okay, so let's just compare that. Flicking back and forth, there to there. So that to me is quite clean. So I'm happy with the reflection pass. Let's go to the specular. Still noise, so we got noise here. And if we go to the diffuse, we've got a hell of a lot of noise. And the specular and diffuse noise is coming from our light samples. So that's controlled here. So we'll take a snapshot and we'll turn on light samples. So right now we don't have any more samples than 16. So we need to go higher than 16 with our local samples. So this has to be a minimum of 16 to get this same result. So let's turn this up to something like 128 and see where we get. Let's hit render. See how we're doing. So we still got noise. See that straight away, but we've cleared it up just a little bit more. So take another snapshot and we'll go up to, I think we'll pump this up to 512. Just hit refresh. If you had subsurface scattering as well, you do exactly the same. So you'd add the subsurface scattering AOV and override these samples here and increase the samples until you've killed off that noise. See how we're looking at that? Yeah, there you go. So we're really cleaning that noise up now. Yeah, that's a lot cleaner. So I think I'm happy with 512. I think it could go up just a little bit more because I'm seeing some noise in here, but there are also a lot of sort of edges and lines, and I think we could clear that up by increasing our unified sampling. So I'm going to go back to the sampling options. I'm happy with my sampling overrides. They're looking cool. We've cleared up the noise using that local method. So what we can do now is just increase these max samples no higher than our max local samples. So you can see the maximum local samples we've got here is 512. So that we don't really want to go above that with our unified sampling. So we could set this to 256, which I find works for most of my scenes actually. So something like 8 and 256. And I'm just going to hit render on this. Switching back and forth, so you can see now we've really cleared up that noise there by a significant amount. So I think that's done a pretty damn good job there. We'll see how long this takes to finish. That's looking pretty good. Let's go through the GI again. It's looking nice and clean. Let's have a little mosey around. Refraction is clean, and that only has 8 samples. Reflection is also clean. If you have this, so let's say for example we've got some slightly pingier reflections here, so it's coming from the metallicity of the chair leg, and if our unified sampling, the max samples, was too low, then those pingy bright spots would become more apparent and they'd be very flickery. So that's why it's important to make sure your max samples are reasonably high to clean up all of the sort of anti-aliasing. Okay, so that ended up being a 1 minute 23 render. Just going to hit save on this. And what we can do now that we've sort of sussed out all of our settings is that we can render out an irradiance point cloud map and also an irradiance cache map, which should make the render a fair amount faster. So let's switch and turn off the override camera resolution, so we're up to our normal res. We'll go to the redshift tab, global illumination, under radiance point cloud. we'll tick this to rebuild. So this is going to build us our map. So this is the irradiance point cloud. We'll browse. Job, cache, irradiance. I saved mine in here. We'll just chuck it in temp. So we'll do IRR underscore, I don't know, yeah, point cloud dot rs map. Very important to add the extension. There we can copy this path here, paste it into here. We'll turn on rebuild and change this to cache. I'm just going to hit save. So now we have the cache being written out to that folder. But before this gets written out, we need to hit render. Let's check out this temp folder. So it's empty. And as soon as this render starts, it should populate with the point cloud map first. So you can see it's going through this first initial stage, and it's done that. Now it's moving on to the caching stage. And this file is 12 meg. And the point cloud map is always smaller than the cache map. So the cache map is considerably larger. You may find in the final scene for this that this memory setting isn't large enough. So the irradiance point cloud cache is at 128 meg, which is absolutely fine. So it's only at 12 meg here. The final scene I think was around 25 meg. But the irradiance cache, the irradiance cache here is set to 128 meg, and in my final scene, it was I think around 373 meg, which is very, very high. So this render actually won't complete in the final scene unless I turn the irradiance working cache up to around 512 meg. Otherwise, the irradiance cache map won't fit on or fit in the VRAM. So that's very important to remember that. In this scene we don't need to do anything because the scene is quite light. There's not a lot of objects in it. So you can see it's nice and clean. Looking in the dark areas as well, just to check for noise. And with all of the other objects in the scene, using the techniques that I've showed you, you can more or less apply them to all of the other objects. So, for example, for the arches here, and those little ornaments, you can just sort of reapply this pillar wall texture, adjust it, and I'm more or less just repeating the same steps that I've showed you guys. So just wait for this to finish, and the first time is always very long as it's writing out that map. So you can see that map is 85 meg. So that would fit on this here because the total number is 128 meg. But like I said, as you add more objects into the scene and the scene becomes more elaborate, you need to increase this. It'll also come up with a warning sign saying your irradiance cache doesn't fit on the VRAM and it'll come up in red and your render won't finish, so you know to turn this up. So this has got to be maybe like a 3-minute render or something. It seems quite long. But it is super clean. So that was 4 minutes 19. Let's stop that render. What we'll do now is go back to the global illumination tab, and this is very important for the next render. We should tick load. If we don't tick load, then that map gets overwritten, so it makes the entire process pointless. So make sure you tick load here. So we'll do a re-render. I'm just going to open that render view once again, and now it's loading that map in. Hopefully this should take less time. Also, a really cool feature with Irradiance caching is this fly-through mode. So if you have a scene and you have a moving camera in that scene and you're moving around, or there's objects moving, then you want to tick this fly-through mode. If you don't, you're going to get the global illumination sort of swimming around the image as the camera's moving. So it's very important to tick that if you have sort of like an animated camera in the scene. So we can see straight away by ticking this load option, this is already quicker. We can see it sort of eating away at the image faster. The startup time as well was faster. Still a tiny bit of noise sort of at the back here, but I don't think that's going to be too noticeable. See if we saved ourselves any time. If not, either way, it's a nice clean render. 2 minutes 44. So by loading the RS maps in, so the irradiance maps, we've reduced our time by about 30% or more. Yeah, not bad. It's really good. So they're more or less my final render settings there. One last thing I do is just go into the output AOVs and I'd add in a Z depth pass. So Z depth, I'd make sure this is set to full, depth mode to Z, and I'd set this to 32 bits. You also want to add a cryptomat for compositing. Not sure what happened to that. There it is. So I'll add a, let's delete that one. Add one to the top. I'll add a cryptomat, and this will be based on, this is 16-bit and based on the node name. You can also add a few more, such as world position and maybe object position or normals. And if you add the world position and normals if I can find them. Then you can use the relighting tool in Nuke. So if you wanted to, add some like highlights or something, or relight the chair or the table or whatnot, then you could use those two AOVs to do that. And that's pretty much it, guys. So they're my render settings. So I'll see you guys in Nuke for some compositing.